The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to our Leaders in Housing Counseling call. We'll get started in just a minute. I wanted to give people a little bit of time to get onto the call. So we'll be with you just momentarily. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for our Leaders in Housing Counseling call. This is Bruce Dorr-Palin from the National Housing Resource Center. We have Matthew Gaudreau on the line as well, who will orchestrate the call and make sure that we can get everybody's opinions heard and engaged with. Just as a very quick rundown on what today's agenda is, we're going to talk a little bit about membership in the National Housing Resource Center, and then we've got a number of sign-on letters that are going to come out very quickly, and hopefully that you all can scramble and join us on these. They're on critical issues. We'll talk about them in a moment. The main focus of the call today will be, as we all know, there's a major rule on HUD. The HUD is proposed on certification for counselors, but we also have a broad range of issues to deal with HUD and our relationship with HUD as one of the primary funders. So we've invited Laura Buxbaum on from CEI in Maine, and hopefully she'll lead us in a discussion about what we should do and would like this to lead to a bigger, broader attempt to communicate with HUD about what organizational needs agencies have and how we can work more efficiently and effectively with them. We'll also do a rapid-fire news you need to know about things that are we will do a little bit more rapid-fire run-through on issues that are coming up right now at the end of the call, and a quick summary on the HUD Certified Housing Advisor issue and where we're standing with it right now. So going well, why don't we move on to our first topic, which is membership in the National Housing Resource Center. And, you know, we are doing a lot of great work. We really appreciate your engagement with all this. We have become, I think, we've had a real opportunity to get housing counseling front and square in front of many of the decision makers. We have been deeply involved in lots of the housing issues that are affecting this country and affecting the work that all of us do. And I think we've really been able to change the conversation about being able to get housing counseling recognized at all kinds of levels in the decision making with the administration, on the Hill, and among some of the lenders and servicers. This is a great opportunity, but you know, at the end of the day, we really are going to sink and float by having a sustainable organization that can be supported by the organizations that benefit from it and are engaged with it. Matthew put up our top 3 reasons to join NHRC, and if there's anything ever creative on the agenda, it's always Matthew's doing. So working our way down, there are some membership benefits. There's a great credit report discount. It's $9.75 for a tri-merge credit report. We're looking at, and Matthew's been working on putting together member-only webinars around hot breaking issues that'll be helpful to agencies. We will have an internal listing of funding opportunities and how to access them. So we'll do a lot of things to help members, but we're really also committed to keeping as much of the program as we can available to the broader community and relying on people to step up and join. Obviously, the leaders' calls, which you're participating in, and the listserv, we like to have them really be a broad thing, and if we can keep the organization going, we'll continue to make it a source of information for people. Hopefully it's timely and rapid fire, and it's also an opportunity for dialogue among our organizations, and we can help figure out what our positions should be and help learn from each other. But you know, at the end of the day, it's also the fact that we're really engaging with the key people who are making decisions and with the institutions, and we're able to continually push this need that housing counseling, the work that we do, the ability to deliver to clients, that needs to be front and center in all the kinds of policy conversations that are happening. This is working. And so what we're hoping is that you'll think seriously about joining the National Housing Resource Center. There's a fee scale based on the size of the organization. We'll continue offering and trying to make it available to you in the best ways that we can, and we're hoping that you will think seriously about joining and getting involved at that level as well. So on that note, we're going to move on to a couple key issues that are breaking. So the first is, I think everybody's familiar with the Federal Mortgage Debt Relief Act that's been in place for a while. Matthew, tell us where we're at on this.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. So yeah, I think folks are familiar with this. Just to kind of recap, so this is a bill that's been in place since the Bush administration, and basically says that for homeowners, if they have a principal reduction on their purchase mortgage, purchase money mortgage, that reduction does not count as taxable income. So if this law weren't in place, then homeowners would be required to pay taxes. So if you had a $10,000 principal reduction, that'd be $10,000 of treated as $10,000 of taxable income. So this bill, it's been extended every year since it was passed. I think in 2007, I think was the first year, but it's due to expire now at the end of the year on December 31st, and there's some question about whether it's going to be extended, and it's obviously very critical for all of us and for our clients to make sure that it is extended. So we're going to be circulating after the call a sign-on letter. Basically, there's two things that we're asking for in the sign-on letter. One is that the bill be extended for 2 years. Try to avoid having to do this, every single year. Start from scratch trying to get it renewed again. Hopefully, can get it extended for 2 years. Then the other goal is to expand it so that it also would apply to principal reductions on a refinance mortgage. So those are the two goals. We're going to circulate the letter after the call. Really urgent that we get people to sign on as soon as possible. What we're asking is if it's at all possible for groups to sign on by the end of the day tomorrow. And the way that we'll do it is we've done it with other sign-on letters through a SurveyMonkey that I'll include a link in the email that I send out after the call. But if it's at all possible to do it by the end of the day tomorrow, there's the two kind of challenges with the bill. First, there's just not a lot of legislative days left between now and the end of the year. There's only about 8 days where the House and Senate will both be in session. So it's just a short time frame. The other kind of challenge, and we won't get too far into the weeds with it, but it's just getting it a vote actually taken on it. So that's where we really need to put the pressure on, is to make sure that it gets brought up for a vote. So in addition, we want to make sure that we get the letter out as soon as possible. We'll submit the letter tomorrow at the end of the day. If your group isn't able to sign on then, we will keep it open for a few extra days. So we will still be asking for signatures, but if it's possible, the sooner the better. And the one other thing that I'll say is that because of the urgency of this, we are also asking folks to make calls, really to anyone that you have relationships with, but especially we're looking for calls to Senate Republicans, and then also to Majority Leader Reid from Nevada and Senator Baucus from Montana, who's the chairman of the committee. So any Senate Republicans, and especially those two Democrats, if you can make phone calls to their office. What we're hearing is that they've just not heard a lot from constituents on this, and so while there's a lot of support, there's some bipartisan support for the bill. There's a lot of support from the business community, from advocates, from consumer advocates, and from people in the housing community. They haven't heard enough from constituents, so they don't realize. We're afraid they don't realize the urgency of it. So we're asking you to, in addition to signing on the letter, to make phone calls.
And Matthew, when will we get the text of the sign-on letter out to people?
So I will circulate that in the follow-up email that I'll send out after the call. So within an hour or two after we're off the call.
Good. Yeah. So this is a hot one. We're in trouble on this one, and ironically, as you I'm sure saw, the large Chase settlement, some $2 billion of which can go towards $1.5 billion, whatever it is, go towards principal reduction, and those people will then end up getting the people in foreclosure who are getting a a principal reduction and suddenly have to pay on taxes on what the IRS is considered a gift of money, but in fact they're not getting any cash. They're in terrible financial circumstances, and to get the principal reduction will keep them in the house, but not if they have to pay a tax bill on money that they actually never saw in hand. So if we can get this through, it's a bill that actually started under the Bush administration, and so would love to see this get extended. So you could be very helpful on this when we'll get this out very soon.
And just the irony
Yeah.
that Bruce was just pointing out is that a lot of the settlement that Chase has just reached, which is $13 billion, a lot of that is going to be exempted from tax. It's going to be a tax write-off for them. So it's extremely ironic that that's going to be happening in this context.
So Chase can get a tax write-off, but the people getting the principal reductions cannot. Okay, Matthew, you're in charge of the irony department there. Okay, so letter to the administration on the upcoming housing counseling funding for next year, not the budget that's under CR right this year, but for next year. Every year we'll do this cycle, and the administration goes through a process of writing a new budget and what the amounts should be in each category. And so this year we're going to put out a letter which will go to the President and will also go to the Office of Management of the Budget, the OMB office, and it will be to set up, the goal is to set the housing counseling funding levels as high as possible. And after some discussion with people familiar with the Hill and some of our allies, we're actually proposing for the HUD housing counseling funding to be $55 million and NFMC $77 million. The reason is that was the level, the $55 million was the level that the administration proposed in the last budget, and actually didn't get it, but it was a number that the Senate Democrats had settled on last year. We're trying not to get ahead of them. And we'd love to be able to argue for $87.5 million at this point, which was the high that we had in the past, and the feeling was that was not that was just not politically feasible. So for this particular round, we'll do $55 million. $77 million was what made it through the last approved budget. So the idea here is that we want to get these numbers out early, get the administration to own as high a set of numbers as possible, and we'll put this out as a sign-on letter. We'll hope that your groups will sign on as well, and we'll do that with it'll be attached to a SurveyMonkey, so you can sign on to that. So keep an eye out for those. This one we probably will only do early next week, but the Federal Mortgage Debt Relief Act turns out we're in a rush situation, and we'll get it started today still. Okay. So our next issue is our friends at HUD. I mean, we should just say that in many ways they have been much more accessible and open-minded than we've ever had in our history with HUD. There's lots of exciting things going on. There's also, just might as well say it, there's just a whole bunch of challenges as well. We have in front of us the certification rule for certifying counselors, which is Dodd-Frank mandated, but we've been given an extra few weeks to comment on it, and that's one set of issues. But I think we also want to look at our longer-term issues that we have with HUD that are maybe more day-to-day issues, like the HCS system or site reviews or whatever the kinds of things are that you're concerned about in terms of what we're doing with HUD. And the goal will be that we'll have our HUD task force meeting Friday afternoon, and we'll have a chance to start working on some specific proposals, some of which will become our comment letter to the to HUD on the proposed rule, and some of which will be more of an ongoing conversation. Hopefully, so Laura Buxbaum, who has been a frequent commenter in our calls, has been gracious enough to help lead this conversation. Laura works at CEI in Maine and has been involved with many of the housing counseling issues over time. And so let me just, Laura, are you there?
I'm here. Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted and coming through clearly.
Okay.
Great. Well, take it away.
All right. Well, I think I was asked by Bruce to sort of facilitate this conversation, and it's challenging to have a conversation on this type of webinar. So I think the first thing to say is that I don't have a lot to say about these issues. What I'd encourage people to do is to go ahead and raise their hands and get in line to speak if you have something to say. Try to make sure that you are doing that through your phone and not your computer, because otherwise we have a lot of technical difficulties. And or type your comments into the chat box, and Matthew or Bruce will read them, and we can have a discussion that way. I think there are a couple of things we want to do here. One is, as Bruce mentioned, the deadline for commenting on the new proposed housing counselor certification rule is December 12th. It's been extended a month, which is good. And RCAC already circulated a sign-on letter to this group. NHRC is working on a sign-on letter, and many other organizations, I think, are going to be and should be submitting their own comments to the rule. So what we wanted to do here was to gather some input from everybody about what might go into an NHRC letter, and have some discussion about our concerns in general, so that maybe we can either speak with a unified voice, or at least give each other some input into our own comments. So that's the first piece. The second piece is, as Bruce mentioned, that NHRC is convening a task force that's going to have its first meeting on Friday that'll go beyond just certification issues, talk about the PAR issues, HCS, site review, inconsistencies, and general communication with HUD, good, bad, and indifferent. And so I think, Bruce, you're looking for some input into that first meeting, as well as certainly the task force is still open to people who want to participate on Friday. So why don't we start by just talking a little bit about the certification rule as it's proposed. My organization has some general concerns having to do, and RCAC laid some of these out as well. For one thing, we understand that this is required by Dodd-Frank, but we're all concerned about funding, and funding is dwindling, and so adding this requirement onto agencies or onto individual counselors, as the rule seems to indicate, at this time is going to create some hardship. So there are issues around that, and could there be some funding to help support it, or could some of the process be free or very cheap? So that's one issue. Another issue has to do with how you deal with timing if you replace a counselor, or let's say you're a newer organization trying to get certified. How do you comply with the requirement that you have a counselor or counselors on staff with 6 months of experience and get them certified before you can get your certification? So those are a couple of issues, and I just like to open that up to. I see you're sending me messages. Sorry, to everybody to chime in with what their concerns might be, and what advice you might give to NHRC or to any of us in terms of submitting our letters. Got any hands up, Matthew? Or
so far, we've just gotten some comments in the question box, but certainly the cost issue is one that resonates, I think, with everyone. One really interesting comment from Stephanie Galvin is that she received a call from someone at VIXL who is working with HUD to develop their training program, and this VIXL is interested in interviewing counselors to obtain input. So that's the first I've heard that HUD was actually working with a particular vendor in developing training materials. Certainly encouraging that they're reaching out to counselors, but I think that's news to a lot of folks on the call probably.
Yeah, so I don't know if this maybe both in the letter or it would be good to encourage HUD to have them reach out broadly, I think. That raises another issue for me, which is who's going to be I understand there's going to be just one training provider, and many of us have received really good training from NeighborWorks or from NCRC. I think we may have some concerns about contracting it out to a new provider and what that would look like, and what happens to all the good training we're already getting.
And there's the experience we had on the reverse mortgage training.
Yeah. Which, yes, we...
So, and just as a practical rule, I mean, the problem was that partly the original trainings were designed not to train to the test, but for some other objectives, and it meant that people were not properly prepared for the test. And the second part, the corollary part to that, was that the test was absurdly difficult and did not really capture the most central elements of the reverse mortgage work, and instead often had very kind of sidebar, tertiary kinds of programs. And the problem was they ended up in a world where only half the people were passing it. I only think half the people passed the test in the original rounds, and we have a shortage of reverse mortgage people. So I think it's an area that several people have raised, a lot of us have raised to HUD, but we should make sure that shows up in our comments too.
Just to flag, I mean, certainly the questions around funding are I think getting more feedback or input than any others. And you know, I'll just raise some of the concerns people are raising, and you know, these are things that obviously we don't have answers to, but they're things that need to be addressed in the comments that are submitted. So one issue that's been flagged is if a counselor fails the exam, will they be required to pay again? We should have a place we can take practice tests and provide training material online to prepare the housing counselor. So yeah, issues around training are very important here as well. Just a question of why there's going to be testing in areas of counseling that our organization may not offer as a service. I think the short answer to that is HUD's, at least their reading of Dodd-Frank, is that they're required to test on all 6 of the subject matters they've included in their in the proposed rule. As far as they're concerned, there's no wiggle room there. Just to go back, so Stephanie Galvin said she's not really had the conversation with these folks, but I guess received a call. So maybe we'll just kind of put a grain of salt with that. But also said she looked into them a little bit, and it looks like they're a technology company. Let's see. Other questions. If we take the test and get certified, are we the certified advisor? Or are we going to get a raise? I believe that we should have funding for that. I think that's up to your agency.
That'd be a popular view, I think.
Yeah.
I remember there was also a concern that was raised on a phone call about whether counselors would have to get recertified at some point. And Sarah Jarick said they weren't thinking that they would need to at this point, but they were sort of leaving that door open. We may want to weigh in on that. If we think it's a good idea for counselors to get recertified, we may want to say, after how many years, or what would be the process, or if we don't think it's a good idea, we may want to ask them to codify that, although my impression was they're not going to be willing to. But
we have from a Hecken counselor just kind of agreeing with the sentiment that Bruce was expressing, that she had to dig for her own training materials, did pass the test, but it wasn't because of any training class. another question about why HUD's not going to recognize existing certifications, and again, the answer on that is that their reading of Dodd-Frank is that they're required to test on these 6 different subject matters that they included in the proposal, and that none of the existing certifications cover all of those, so they don't think that they could grandfather in any existing certifications because they wouldn't be comprehensive enough as they think they're required to be. There's some concern that there's going to be a disadvantage for small organizations that have little overhead and reserves to support the cost of the housing counseling certification. There's a question about whether there's going to be a requirement for continuing education, which I think Laura did just address. That as it's proposed now, there's not going to be, it is just a kind of once-in-a-lifetime, but they do kind of reserve maybe revisiting that. So for now, I don't think there is a continuing education component.
Though actually, Sarah has said that the idea is that there would not be repeated testing, but there would be some continuing education expectation. They may consider that in the future.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. They need to clarify the cost of the test, and that, again, in the proposal they kind of estimated, and I forget what number they said exactly. I think they said from a few hundred up to 1,000 based on similar existing tests, and they thought that they would be somewhere kind of in the middle. But again, that's certainly something that does need to be clarified. Some support for recertification or for retesting. Someone says as a HECM counselor, we retest every 3 years. Someone else just says yes, counselors should get recertified. Let's see, there's still a lot of comments coming in. Support for the idea of there being kind of an advisory panel of counselors, managers, et cetera, to the test is being developed to look at a draft. I think that I agree that's a great idea. Yeah, I think that's a good flavor of what's going on out there.
All right. Well, why don't we? People can continue to submit their comments about certification, but why don't we now then move on to other issues or concerns regarding HUD and how we can kind of develop and encourage stronger relationships, better communication with HUD going forward. What thoughts do people have about that, and are there specific issues that are bugging you right now that you'd like the task force to start talking about on Friday? My organization is a sub-grantee of an intermediary, so we haven't had maybe some of the same challenges as those of you who are direct grantees. We've actually had, especially since they opened the new office, we've had a pretty smooth, good communication and smooth relationship with HUD, but I know that's not the case for every agency, and I know there are some people who are particularly concerned about the reporting. So why don't I just throw that out and see what people have to say about it. Are you getting some responses there?
So far, just support that people think that it is a good thing to bring up to the task force.
Okay.
Specific feedback.
So one area that I think there's been a lot of concern about has been these site reviews, and for some agencies, audits. So there's a financial audit, and then going forward, I think the expectations will be higher on what the groups are documenting in the site reviews. So financial sources and more of what your budget looks like will be part of the confirmation process or part of the review process.
I think we have to, I'm not being a HUD apologist here, but we do need to bear in mind that I think HUD is, as we are, fighting for funding for housing counseling and is getting these questions, I think, from Congress or is expecting to get them from Congress. So I'm not for unnecessary reporting or more onerous reporting, but we need to think about if we have specific criticisms of the kind of reporting that we're being asked to do, we may want to think positively about what information we think is reasonable to supply to HUD that could also help our case.
And I was in an interesting conversation with at the Maryland Housing Counselors Network meeting last Thursday. So some of you on the call were in that meeting as well. And there, Sarah talked about rethinking the 9902 so that it's recording the activities that counselors are directly responsible for, but not for those things that they are not responsible for, and they might be recruited in some other way. So it might be the counselor doesn't know if the family got a permanent modification, and but that information ought to be harvested someplace else, and trying to make the 9902 more closely related to the activities of the counselor. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, from our organization's standpoint, we take a lot of credit for those modifications. I wouldn't want to not report them, but I take the point that if you're just doing a sort of initial action plan and then setting the person off on their own, you may not be tracking that. I guess that's a question about what different models of counseling organizations are providing.
Which is a big issue in this whole conversation
about
what is a counseling session and what is the actual outcome at the end of it.
We have difficulty, a great deal of difficulty tracking who buys homes when they come to us,
right.
Particularly for home buyer education. We don't really have good ways of knowing how many of those folks, they don't all need certificates anymore to buy, and so we don't effectively track those. So that's an area where we're a little bit frustrated.
And the idea, I think, is that where those things are recorded, that you know, the lender or the servicer ought to be responsible for providing that information. Though I don't understand how they link the client case to the actual activity. So I'm sure HUD has done some thinking about that, but that's a question.
So we do have a couple questions and comments coming in that I'll just go through. Comments, providing grant approval in June for year starting October 1 presents many budget challenges for organizations.
That's true. And they keep saying they're going to, you know, get quicker, but of course they're not responsible for budget holdups at the congressional level. But it would be good if they could get quicker with that.
Training on the 9902 support should be given for approved CMS systems.
CMS systems. Is that CMS systems? Is that like Counselor Max and
right.
Housing Counselor Online? Is it? Yeah. So does that person mean that the training should be given to the administrators of those systems? Because that's a great idea. Or do they? Is that the intent of that comment? Do you think? Maybe they could clarify.
Yeah, I just got a yes. Client management systems, HCO, and then she said yes.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it does seem as though sometimes what the system is asking you to do may or may not jibe with what HUD really wants. And also you can't get questions answered. I think that's a great idea.
Okay. Someone said HUD offers training on HCO periodically and it's free. I'm not sure if that's exactly to the same point or not, but that may be available. Someone else says, yes, training on 9902 for client management systems. I agree. To the counselors who have to enter data, we get confused as to what we were supposed to do. A question, when site reviews are conducted by the intermediary, will HUD also conduct a site review? I don't know if Bruce or Laura, if either of you can answer that question.
The answer is yes. Right. So we are hearing about them happening. Both of them have responsibilities in this. HUD has talked about potentially maybe shifting that more to the intermediary, but it's just a conversation now. So that might be something that people want to weigh in on.
We had our site reviewed directly with HUD. Sarah Jarique was our person, even though we are a sub-grantee, and our intermediary actually wasn't able to be there at that point, so they weren't really involved. So I don't know if that's how it's going to be, but that's how it was this last one.
Another, I think, kind of changing the topic a little bit, but another comment from Ken Bigos is a fee-based system is a much less onerous system versus recording counselors' time and billing based on the amount of time spent on the case, which is the present system.
This is a difficult question, and one we've got to start thinking about how to get our arms around. HUD obviously needs, for a variety of reasons, to document that work was done and done effectively. I definitely understand the impulse to say, well, filling out a timesheet doesn't tell you that, especially when you're in a world where you're at your desk and you're working on a case and somebody else calls in. You spend 5 minutes on somebody else's case, and then a coworker comes by with a question, and it's not like it's nice and neat and clean, and you work 2 hours on a case and then move to the next one and can separate them out by funding source or by activity. This is a complicated area, and it would be helpful for us. I think one of the things we'd like to do is have a conversation with HUD that involves try to think these things through together. They have a certain set of rules. They have all the OMB compliance issues, and it's always a question of not just interpretation, but also of shading about what you want to emphasize. And maybe we can figure out in some of the really deep in the weeds kind of questions about how to track counselor activities, whether there are better ways to do it that might be easier for the organization and give you as good or better information. I don't have the answer. I'm just saying that might be a conversation we need to do jointly with HUD.
All right. Is there anything else to add? I have another change of topic if there's nothing else to say on that. So if the sub-grantee is locally HUD approved, but it has grants through the intermediary, will the local HUD office continue conducting the biennial review, or will it be the intermediary's reviewer? We found many inconsistencies among HUD offices.
Yeah, we didn't get a clear answer to that. I've asked that question on a number of calls with Sarah Jarique, actually, and also just about whether and how, that's the situation that my organization's in. We're a HUD-certified, we're a local housing counseling agency that is funded as a sub-grantee, and we were getting a message initially that maybe we didn't even need to maintain our individual certification, and then Sarah kind of backtracked on that and said, well, maybe you do. I think that we need to keep asking that question and ask for clarification from them, because I think they're sort of waffling on it. And maybe think about what's best for us so that we can advocate. I'm not sure what the answer is, but what's preferable from our point of view.
And number two of that question is really a big deal, which is the inconsistencies between reviewers. Yeah. And I know that Sarah and Brian have paid a lot of attention to this and tried to improve it and the quality of the checklist, but we continue to hear reports in the field of really wide inconsistencies.
I'd be interested to know whether folks in that situation feel that they would get a more consistent review from their intermediary, or whether they would rather have HUD do the review but make sure that HUD is being consistent. Or I don't know if there may be differing opinions about that.
And just on this question of differing opinions, it's perfectly fine for us to have different opinions within our community around this kind of thing, that HUD can handle complexity, needs to recognize that the needs of some organizations might be different than others, needs to understand that there might be a broad diversity of opinion on some things because it helps inform their decision. It's a little bit different than where you're dealing with a policy issue on the Hill where it's very black and white, yes or no. In this world, I think we're getting a pretty good ear, so we can handle that there's a range of opinions and should not feel bad about that.
And just to Laura's question, the feedback we've gotten so far is that either would be fine. The important thing is that it just needs to be consistent.
Mm-hmm.
Was one person's comment on that. And we have had some folks weigh in with some more comments with respect to the kind of fee structure and the reporting to HUD on counselor time spent. But I think this seems like a good kind of list of topics to cover on the task force. Good.
Great.
Initially. Good. Do you have any closing thoughts, Laura?
No. I think we really appreciate NHRC's role in just bringing us together to have these kinds of discussions. I think that this is just tremendously valuable, and so thank you for doing that, and thanks to everybody on the phone and the computer who weighed in, and let's just keep it up.
Yeah, keep the comments coming in. We will definitely use that. If you're interested in being part of the task force, then contact Matthew. He's the central point on all these kind of questions, and we'll have our first task force meeting on Friday. Thank you so much, Laura. Always good to hear from you, and appreciate your insights. And we'll work on trying to get some paper and responses out early from the task force so that people can start seeing where they're going with all this.
When might we see a draft comment letter on certification from you, Bruce?
Oh, I'm feeling so much pressure already. You know, we're going to have to do something early next week because,
okay.
Let's say this. We'll definitely do something after Thanksgiving. We'll definitely at least have a draft. And we're going to have to figure out the timing, whether we do this as a sign-on or whether we just do it as a statement. And the reason is that we may be fine-tuning and responding to this all the way to the line. And, you know, one of the nice things is we'll send out a draft, and the idea here is that we'd like you to respond, and you can redline edit the thing and correct the spelling and tell us, oh, we're crazy on this, but boy, thank goodness you brought that up. I mean, we don't mind a kind of a robust conversation on all this, so that'll be good.
Great. Well, thanks.
All right. Thank you.
And I'll also just add very quickly that folks that have made comments on the counselor certification just know that we have a log of all the comments that people type in during these conversations. So we have your feedback, and we'll certainly be incorporating that into whatever we do come up with.
Good. Well, let's go back. Let's go over to news you need to know. Okay. So, you know, here's one of the places where we've learned a lot. So on the CFPB agency locator tool, it turns out that a bunch of us didn't show up. A bunch of the agencies did not show up on the locator. And this locator is very important for us. And the reason that it's important is that the CFPB will use this list, or suggesting that the servicers and the lenders use this list to notify, as the list that they use to notify home buyers and homeowners about the availability of counseling. And so being on that list will get you to the right people, get you people who are very much in need of our services. We had tried to get it set up so that the CFPB would notify people early in the process, and that may happen informally, but the formal Dodd-Frank requirements are that it happens before they are right at mortgage application and when they're being notified by their servicer about the opportunities for modification. But it's a useful tool, and it turns out a bunch of us weren't on it. Well, there were two reasons we weren't on it, and the biggest reason by far was that the agencies weren't on it on the HUD list. And what happened there is that sometimes an agency had been on and had not checked recently, and for technical reasons had come off and had not gotten restored. A few agencies, they had opened a new office. That new office never got recorded or got recorded inadequately. Some of them we don't really know at all why they weren't there. But the solution to the HUD list is relatively easy. So you go to your point of contact at HUD, the person that was your, used to be called the GTR in my day, and they should be able to walk you through this. Some agencies can do this through their HCS connection, but it's easy to do it through HUD. And look, I think we've gotten there are about 15 agencies that I've been told about that have been that probably have gotten restored now for because they weren't making the connection. The other population was that they were on the HUD list and didn't make it to the CFPB list. And so there are 4 agencies we found about so far, and CFPB has identified a glitch in their system and are fixing that system, and they're arranging for a contact for us so that if there's any problem going forward and you've checked and you're on the HUD list, please let me know. We should have a kind of a quick solution line at CFPB to correct and get your agency restored in the CFPB list. The CFPB list harvests every 24 hours the HUD list, so then it should be restored pretty quickly if it was fixed on HUD, and give it 24 or 48 hours, and if they haven't shown up on the CFPB list, we're glad to deal with those as well. But that's the nice thing is when you do a deep dive, and you guys were very responsive, we learned a lot about this process. Which leads us to topic number 2, which is pretty interesting. So this is an inside word from HUD. So the HUD's Housing Counselor Locator is different than the CFPB model. The CFPB model, you put in your zip code, it'll find 10 agencies close to that area and give you those locations, telephone numbers, contact information. Oh, and I should say before we go too much further, we're trying to get the CFPB to also organize this data so it can be sorted by language and by the kind of counseling services that are delivered, and they're looking into those questions right now. They are limited a little bit by HUD's level of technology, and until HUD gets its next appropriation and does a build out, but we're hoping they can be more accurate. So going back to the HUD list now, it turns out that the HUD list is based on well, obviously the information you provide, but then when somebody calls in on the line or puts in information to locate a counselor in a certain area, the driving force, it turns out, is they've based it on zip codes. And in your HCS listing, there's a place where you can put in zip codes, and it turns out that agencies have not done a good job filling this out. And so the goal here in this conversation is for you to go back and take a look at the zip codes that are listed there. And your interest, if you want lots of clients, is to have as large a pool of zip codes as possible, identifying where your clients come from now, if you want to continue getting them from there, but also identifying areas where you would like to bring counselors, clients in. And that's the driving force. And it's, you know, no big secret, but it turns out that we haven't been very good about keeping these maintained and up to date and expanding them as we grow. So that's the one big secret, and it's not a secret anymore, but an opportunity for you to increase your client flow through the HUD hotline, which is actually a very good source. People do use it. People do find agencies that way, so it's useful to do. The latest on the...
You just,
yes,
I'm sorry,
sure.
To clarify, so what should folks do? Should they send HUD a list of the zip codes they serve? How should they get that information to HUD?
Okay, so you can always talk to your point of contact, but in your HCS listing, there's a place where you can put in the zip codes. And I haven't done it in years, so I don't remember how to get there, but poke around in there, and there should be a place where the zip codes go. But that's good. You know what? We should talk to HUD and try to get a little bit more information, and we can put out a mini fact sheet on that. So Matthew, let's make sure we do that. And let's set it up so people can take care of the issue themselves. Good. Is that it? All right. So this Treasury post-modification counseling program. So as we talked about earlier, we had Treasury on the call last time. This is a great opportunity for providing the kind of counseling I think most agencies want to be able to do about the total finances of the family. Treasury is paying for it through the servicer, and it's for people who are either in a trial modification currently, or they have a modification but they've missed 2 payments. They've had 2 30-day lates, I should say. Those are triggers for getting the getting referred to post-modification counseling. The original conversation, it seemed like, was that there'd only be one national provider with each servicer, or 1 or 2, and that they would have national coverage. We've been reaching out to servicers and getting a good ear saying, well, you know, if a housing counseling agency is providing the counseling on the modification, it doesn't make sense to ask the client to go to somebody else, establish a new relationship, start the paperwork all over to do the post-mod counseling. That should be a continuous flow. And the program only starts March 1st, but servicers are setting their program guidelines up now, so now's the time to talk to them. And the best route is to use your established relationships and see if they can guide you to the right people to talk to. We have had at least a preliminary conversation with Wells, with Bank of America, with Citi, with Ocwen, and we'll talk with Chase in the middle of December. We're reaching out to others, and certainly anybody who's got, especially with the non-bank servicers, anybody who's got any leads. So we've reached out to NationStar as well. But the other ones like Green Tree and SPS, if you've got relations there, I'd be very interested in trying to follow up there. I think this is a major opportunity for the industry. We need to figure out how to pay for this work more, and the funding is in place, and the problem is that we have to make it so that we're that each of your agencies is a place that actually gets this done with each servicer. So it will require some work on your part. We're trying to get Treasury to help us in these conversations as well, but we'll continue to pursue it. So I'm just really encouraging to make these calls now to the managers that you know at any of these units.
We have a couple questions.
Oh, sure.
Go through on this. Someone says, I'm looking at a letter in front of me from a lender telling a client to go to a HUD-approved counseling as a step for the trial, and that it is free. But who is paying for the resources for this free counseling for the client? Should they reach out directly to NationStar?
Yes. And you might recall we had NationStar on our call about a month ago, and we had in there a list of the senior people who encouraged us to contact them. So I've reached out to Dana Dillard, who's the boss there, but you might figure out who on that tree might be closest to your work and reach out to them as well. So if the letter was generated by NationStar and they sent to the client, then you know, I'd say, boy, that's kind of an invite. Now the program only starts March 1. I don't know that they can get paid for the stuff they've done before March 1. That's actually a question we should ask Mark McCardle. Yeah, that's an opportunity.
All right. Another question. Are there any statewide coalitions looking at contracting with services for the post-mod counseling? Maybe that's partly a question, partly a suggestion.
Yeah, so Bank of America has raised the issue about they don't think that they can contract with 2,400 agencies. That's the number of housing counseling agencies that are out there. And maybe there's some way to consolidate more people. The conversation was consolidated into some groupings of some kind. So I don't have an answer for that. We're going to see where Bank of America goes with that question. You know, it is kind of what would the logical methodology be, and it may be some intermediaries might be able to play that role. Maybe there's some regional groupings that could do that as well. But you know, it does take a lot of mechanical work, and it will, you know, it costs money for the agencies that actually would administer something like that. So it's a complicated issue. I don't have a good answer for that.
All right. We had someone asking if it's limited to a certain set of servicers, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bruce, but my understanding is that it's any servicer that's participating in HAMP.
No, it's actually a specific list. If you just search for post-modification, what is it called? The post-modification counseling in the subject line, you'll get the email from me about this, and it has a list of which servicers are covered. There were a few that they didn't do, largely for size, but it's not every HAMP servicer, right, unfortunately.
And we do have just a few comments that it sounds like level 4 counseling through NFMC, and then levels 4A and 4B. Someone else said the same thing. So that's all we've got on that.
Well, yeah. Well, it's a separate program, but you could use that framework. You have a lot of flexibility about what the framework is that you use, the ideas that you're working people's back and ratio debts down, which is what the NFMC thing was, but also it could just be managing people's budgets, dealing with utility bills, all those sorts of things. So it might be broader. Good. So on the Chase $13 billion settlement, so we're just beginning to get the pieces together of what the resolution is. You know, we have done a lot to try to influence this conversation, but we're not at the negotiating table. We're, you know, a few steps back, so we've been kind of making proposals. So it looks like there's some good things that happened in the settlement and moves some parts of the things we're most concerned about forward, and there were some disappointments as well. So I'll just give you a few highlights very quickly. One is that it's pretty strong on principal forgiveness. So there's, and especially first lien principal forgiveness, and there can be up to $1.2 billion in principal forgiveness, and there's some incentives to hit hardest hit areas, a little bit greater, and some of that money could be used for forgiving forbearance and not just principal forgiveness, which we think is very good. And the problems with the HAMP forbearance being a drag on people's ability to recover from the recovery and sell their house and all those sorts of things, that those we think will be helpful. They do have some that can go towards the second lien, and they're not valued quite as highly, or at least if they're delinquent, they're not valued as quite as highly, which is probably a good thing, but they can get credit for it and wipe out some second lien debts. Though there was a lot of detail missing in all these. One of the things we really had tried to push very hard was this idea that in the Bank of America principal reductions, it's actually countrywide, but Bank of America managed it. The problem was that it appeared that wealthier people would get the principal reductions, and the people that we were working with were routinely not getting it, and there was no way for us to influence the process and try to get our people in front. We really pushed hard to try not to have that situation happen again. There's no detail. This is all very bare bones, and so that issue is not addressed, and we're going to continue pushing through our channels to try to create an environment where a counselor can propose somebody or nominate somebody to get the principal reduction and try to get in. But not part of it right now, and we're worried that it'll all be up to Chase, and there'll be some, accountant in the back room making these decisions rather than something based on need. There are benefits for doing rate reductions and refinancing, and one area that we were encouraging and is not spelled out in great detail, but that there will be a low and moderate income and disaster area lending, so that there's mortgage money that will be available that hopefully people can qualify for who were impacted by the recession or by a disaster and might not be able in normal circumstances to be qualified, or in the current circumstances to be qualified, but could be. And there's an ability to get some credits for money which we hope would be used for down payment. It's not quite clear what that's for. But, again, something that increases the opportunities, especially in low and moderate income and disaster communities. They do have some anti-blight pieces, which we sent this out, and you probably can take a look at. What's most interesting, I think, is that they did put in credits for REO properties being donated to cities or land banks or nonprofits, or service members with disabilities or relatives of deceased service members, and that's a dollar-for-dollar credit, which is a strong credit under this program. I think that could be helpful. We're very worried about dumping of properties rather than the nonprofits being able to select what the property is. And that's not spelled out or addressed in this, so we're hoping to try to get that elevated. There are funds donated to capitalized community equity restoration funds or substantially similar community redevelopment funds. Again, an opportunity that might be very useful to some local communities trying to recover. And that's really it. That's the list. So we were trying to encourage some other initiatives as well, direct funding for housing counseling and for outreach, and some maybe discounted funding for discounted sales to the nonprofit community capital type programs that would buy mortgages and rework them. And that those did not make the list. Actually, we had a pretty long list, but it's very important that we make some serious progress on the principal reduction issue. So that was, I think, very good news, and we'll certainly inform you as we learn more about if there's more detail. We're hoping to get more detail or have them construct more detail in terms of how to get this money out and how.
I'm just going to jump in with
yeah.
a little more detail from Ellie Pepper from Empire State Justice, who's been doing a lot of work and kind of advocating around the issues that Bruce has been talking about and trying to get those included. So just so the information here is specific to New York State, but Ellie said that she does kind of expect that it would be similar in other areas. So for New York State, it's $613 million to be used to expand the homeowner protection program and expand funding of land banks. This will be done through RFP, has been done with the NMS funding. And then also for New York State, it's going to be $400 million for consumer relief, not money that's going directly to homeowners, but it's the projected amount Chase will give in New York for principal reduction and forbearance agreements. So again, just specific to New York, but maybe there's some reason to think that it may be similar in other areas.
So that's a parallel, and there were several AGs that took the lead on this that had cases. So, and I'm not going to know them all, but off the top of my head, it was New York, Delaware, Illinois, and California were the ones that I can think of. I think Montana. So each of those have their own agreements. We assume have their own agreements, so that will probably be a local announcement. Good. Well, thank you, Ellie, who's participated in a bunch of these things. That's very helpful. Okay, we're going to move on really quickly because we're over time again, and rapid fire. The one other thing is that it's still open to vote on the new name for housing counselors, HUD Certified Housing Advisor. And I think it's really important. If you think it's a good idea, you need to vote yes. We were at about 85% of the people initially voting in favor of it. It's been declining some, and you know, I think the dissenters are voting for it. So if you're a dissenter, you should feel free to come in and vote, and please put in your comments that they have actually been fairly helpful, and we've done some thinking about what some of you have written already, and are helping us shape in some ways how to think about some of this. But certainly if you're in favor of the idea, we do want you to vote yes as well. This is sort of a multi-step process. If we kind of come to a reasonable agreement that this is a way to go, we will start circulating this in other networks in our world, and then eventually we'll have a conversation with HUD about it. But the critical thing, I guess, for us is that there's been a lot of discussion about how we need to rebrand housing counseling so that it's really recognized in the broader community and get people to go early to counseling before they make major financial decisions. There's been an ongoing dissatisfaction with the name. The idea is, let's pull the trigger now, let's deal with the name question, and that allows us then to go to the next step, which is the bigger, broader rebranding question, how to do that and where to go with it. So, you know, we're at step one here, and hopefully you can dive in. Actually, Matthew will, when he does the summary, will circulate again the link to the SurveyMonkey on that question. And just our last note is, as we started the call, we'll remind you, please join NHRC. We want to continue doing this. We would like to do more. You know, your engagement and involvement is really, really valuable and helpful. Being a member really strengthens our work, allows us to say that we represent lots of people. We will engage you on a different level if you're a member and invite you to some meetings that we don't invite everybody to. We do want broad participation, but getting a membership is a way to really support this work and make it grow. Thank you very much, everybody. I know you're doing good work out there. We won't have another call until December, but we won't have a large leaders call until December. There'll be a lot that's happening, so look out for the emails shooting from us in the next few days. And we're very interested in what you have to say on HUD. So if at this point, if you've got some more thoughts and feel like you want to add them, shoot them as an email to me or to Matthew or to Afreen Alam, who's heading up the task force. All three of us will be glad to elevate the issue. All right, everybody, take care now.